Welcome to Business Therapy, the podcast that explores the intersection of business and mindfulness. In this show, we bring you stories and expert insights on how mindfulness can help you succeed in your career and lead a more fulfilling life. Let's talk about it on Business Therapy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Business Therapy, episode 69. Today on the show, we're excited to invite Steven Lentz. Steven, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're generally going to talk about Steven's background and experience as it relates to decision making and especially analysis paralysis. But before we jump into the discussion, Steven, I'd love to invite you to tell us a little bit more about your background and what brings you to the show today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I was a firefighter for over 10 years. And through the course of time, it was not the normal pathway that most firefighters or entrepreneurs take. So I got hired on after volunteering for a year and a half. And then within that first year and a half, we ran out of money for me and another guy. So we were let go. And then I was hired on from another department, was with them for a year and a half and again let go. And so this idea of the pseudo government job with, a pension and longevity that would be there for me forever just really shattered my mindset of security, right? It destroyed that paradigm for me of a lasting thing that would be there. Family. So I did everything you could think of, right? I did fix and flip real estate, sold life insurance over the phone. I sold Kirby vacuums door to door for a hot moment. Like, you name it, I did it, and it sucked really hard. And it was, it was awful, right? But then, fast forward a few years, and I was like, I need to get good at marketing because business with bad marketing is not a business. Like, you end up back on the street. And I kept finding myself back on the street. I was like, this is awful. And so I got good at it and then started doing well, and department called back like, hey, we have money. Do you want to come back? And it's like, well, of course, right? Like, I like picking grandma up off the floor and cutting kids out of cars. Why wouldn't I come back? And so at this point now, I went from, almost being married to married with 2 kids, and my goals and ambitions have changed, right? Instead of being like, I want to have fun. What's the saying that people are saying? Like, I'm not here for a long time. I want to have a fun time or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. It's switched from, young and invincible to I have 2 kids and I want to be, a grandfather someday, and I want legacy, and I want to be there for my family instead of just being there to have a good time. And, research is coming out that, the smoke is really bad for us, and firefighters live 5-10 years after retirement and then they're dead. And I was like, this is crazy. This is like, I love what I do and I love helping people, but that's not what I want for me and my family at the end of, a 30-year career. Like, I want to enjoy my family. It's like, so where does that leave me? Like, well, I need to work my way out of this. And so then I went to, well, what do I know? Well, I know marketing. And so then I started working my way out of it with marketing. COVID came through. I got COVID, and shocker, I survived. And this might be polarizing for your audience, but, they came through after that and like, hey, this thing called the vaccine came out. You have to have it. And I was like, I don't think I need it. Like, I'm going to COVID houses all the time and I'm fine. And I'm like, well, it's your principles are your job. And I call myself a principled asshole. And so I said, well, I guess I'll have to be terminated. And so I was fired January 30th of last year. Wow. And now I do full-time marketing. Yeah. So, it was hard, right? But it's hard leaving a paycheck. And entrepreneurship is hard with the unknown, right? Facing the unknown is probably one of the hardest things that as a human that we do, right? It's always what you don't know is scarier than what you do know. And walking away from a job where you show up and you get a paycheck, I know that I can provide for my family, and I don't have to worry about necessarily going out and buying a bunch of top ramen. It's difficult, but it's not like I had nothing to fall back on, right? Like, I'd been working on this for the last 5-6 years of starting to get clients and do digital marketing. So I was like, well, this is important for my family. It's the direction I was going anyway. So I left the safety net into doing it by myself.
So let me pause you for 1 second, because I want to make sure I'm following the journey. I understand the transition away from firefighting, but then it sounds like you were in a role which then you elected to leave before you became an entrepreneur because of the vaccine conflict. What was that role you were in at that time?
Yeah. So, I was a firefighter, and seeing that, the longevity of firefighting is not a great outlook for the majority of firefighters, I decided that I needed to make my own agency and start doing digital marketing to work my way out of that, right? Replace my paycheck with a paycheck from being an entrepreneur. So that's what I was doing.
Oh, okay. So
the side hustle, if you will.
The firefighting, the vaccination declination pushed you out of the firefighting finally.
Yeah, that was the catalyst.
Oh, okay.
That was
Got
cutting the strings of the safety net.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think part of like going into decision making, having a safety net is one of those things that is a big mind block for a lot of people. Like, I can put up with this, and I'm working on this, project, because if I fail, it's not terrible. Right. So by having that, the safety net removed, I didn't have a choice. I've been in interviews. It's like, hey, if you don't get this job, what's your plan B? And I started was like, this is plan A, B, C, and D. Like, I am here for this. This is my goal. This is my dream. This is what I'm here for. Right? When I went into that fire interview, that's what I told them. And it was 100% accurate and true. But when, as a human, again, we have this, backup net that we can fall into, it's very hard to move forward sometimes with 100% because we're afraid. Right? People are they're afraid of success. They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of the unknown. There are all these different changes that can stop us from putting in 100 or 1,000. I know you can't go more than 100, but 1,000,000% effort of really going into it and surrendering yourself to that process. So that was the catalyst and really the genesis of really making it work.
So I want to stop there for a second, because we talk about, like you said, decision making. It's the start of this conversation, and the decision to leave a paycheck, as you mentioned, and go into entrepreneurship or go into a risky or an unknown or a lack of safety net scenario is often one of the biggest leaps that most people can't make. They may think they want to, but then they can't. So it sounds like you were pushed a little bit, but talk to us a little bit more about where your mindset was in that scenario, because I imagine it wasn't just, oh, I don't want to get this vaccine, I'm going to throw myself into jeopardy. But did you do budgeting? Did you talk to your family? Because also the pressure of having a family that relies on you for support must have weighed heavily on your mind.
Super hard, a very tough decision. And remember, like, this wasn't a spur of the moment decision. Like, this is something that had been in the work for the last 5 years, right? Of looking at the research and being like, man, this is awful. A real story that happened many years ago, a firefighter brought their contaminated gear home, washed it in the wash machine, and then washed the baby clothes, and the contaminated baby clothes killed their baby. Right? Like, that's the reality that we live in the fire service. And it's a sad, tragic story, but it highlights how unsafe and unhealthy that profession is. Right? And so having that conversation with my wife, being like, we need to work my way out of this. Right? And that's the genesis of that agency. So when the vaccine came, it wasn't like a spur of the moment decision or something like, I need to make something all of a sudden. Like, this is something I had been working for the last 5 or 6 years. It's just I hadn't been doing it wholeheartedly because I had the safety net of a paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I didn't have to make it to make it.
And year after year, you were doing it for your family, which you thought in your head you would not be there for long term because of what you were doing for your family. So that's it's the goal was at odds with one another. So
yeah.
Well, this is where I apologize. I might have been a little slow, but it sounds like the real decision was you were firefighting and building this on the side for several years is the real thing. And this is actually this is a point that a lot of entrepreneurs or desiring people who want to go into entrepreneurship, I think they miss this point, which is you can do it all at first. You don't have to cut your job and then be living on zero and full risk and trying to get your idea to work full time. And I had a similar journey in my life where I was working a full-time job and I thought I really want to be doing my own thing, but I didn't just quit. I had to start building it with my extra hours and working 2 jobs. I would love to hear a little bit more about your thought process. What got you up and going with that safety net of a stable paycheck? But then also you must have put in a decent amount of hours for years to build that clientele and build that momentum. I'd love to hear a little more about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah. And again, right, like living within that safety net, I didn't do it as wholeheartedly as I should have, because the firefighting, and again, with 2 kids, like we have a lot of entrepreneurs that I talk with and like, hey, like I'm just starting out, or I'm a single guy, or like just married. And going into it, just married is very different going into entrepreneurship with 2 kids. When I was at work, and it's shift work, right? So I was gone for 2 days in a row and I would be home for 4 days in a row. So 2 on, 4 off. And when dad is gone, dad is, out of sight, out of mind, kids get it. And then when dad is home, I'm, the father jungle gym. They're crawling all over me and they're making up for the lost time, and I'm exhausted and trying to, spend quality time with them because I am a family guy. Like, I value family, and it's important to me, and I want to be there for them and, give them the things that my dad wasn't able to give me with our whole broken relationship, which I'm not going to go into. But like, I want to be a present father, right? That's important for me. And so it was difficult for me not being able to do any work when I was at the station to try to create a digital marketing agency on the side when I was at home trying to be a present father. And so for people who are like, hey, like, this is, work a side job and do things, like, I wish I had done it when I wasn't a dad, if that makes sense. Like, it's so much easier when it's just you, or the only person you're looking out for is you and your wife, or you and your partner, right? Instead of you and your kids, because that draw on your attention and emotions is so hard. It's only have so much volume, right, within your emotional cup, and to give out a lot of that to your kids and then be like, all right, I'm drained, I'm tired, I've been working 2 jobs, I've given everything I can to my kids, now I need to spend 5 hours in my business, is very difficult. And that's a lot of times where I found myself.
It's tough, though, to go back in time like that and apply a risk assessment based on how your mind is thinking today, because the risk for people coming out of, let's say, college or any circumstance to whatever the next stage is always feels dramatic, so Absolutely. Like doing a startup, and if the startup doesn't work out, I'll have lost all that time, and then I'll never be able to get another job. And like, so the risk always seems, dramatic at any point.
It's less of the risk. I think it's hard. It's less of the risk and more of the ability, right? Like, I don't know if you guys listen to Gary Vee much, but he was like, hey, you're 20s, 30s, like, you don't have a whole lot of responsibilities, like, fail, go out and try stuff, and it doesn't matter, right? Like, I'm almost 40. I know I look like I'm 20, but like, I still have a lot of time. I can live a whole entire lifetime again, starting now, and I'll still be alive afterwards. Like, what a great platform for me to jump off on, that I already start currently today with all of the knowledge and information that I have and experience. Like, that's incredible. The other side of that coin isn't the time. What it is ability to spend that time on that alone, right? My ability to spend time is much more decreased because I have kids, because I have a wife, right? A kid coming out of college doesn't have any of those other responsibilities that draw on their attention, responsibility and time. Yeah. The risk of losing time is the same for everyone, right? We only have 24 hours regardless of who you are. But the relational aspect that comes into that is very different. So if you can fail and try things when you're younger and you don't have kids and a husband or a wife or a partner, whatever it is, prime opportunity to go and, spend 5 years sleeping on your friend's couch, making a startup together. Right? I can't do that. I can't go and be like, hey man, let's go make a startup, and I'm going to, couch surf with you, and we're going to, get this done in 3 years. It doesn't exist for me anymore. Right?
Absolutely. For sure. And that's why, so I guess digging back into your decision-making with limited time, emotional bandwidth, resources, what was your decision-making process? How did you keep at it? Because like you said, some of your narrative is, oh, I wish I'd put more time into it. But kind of like Jonathan mentioned, it's easy to look back and say, well, this worked out, so I wish I'd invested more time. But in the moment, you did. You put the 4 or 5 hours in pretty consistently so that when you were ready to make the jump, you said you had clients, you had momentum. So talk to us. How did you, over time, what was your decision-making mindset that said, I don't have much time, but I am going to do this as a side hustle. I'm going to do this. And you did it fairly consistently, it looks like.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was, what do I want the end of my life to look like? Right? Like, that's where I started that process. And it was, do I want to have 5 types of cancer when I'm 50? Or do I want to have grandkids and great-grandkids be around? And then being like, okay, well, I think I want grandkids and great-grandkids. So what is the process does that look like, right? How do I work my way into that instead of 5 types of cancer when I'm 50? Mm-hmm. And that was, I need to work my way out of this. And so I started that process. It wasn't like, a huge risk analysis or anything. It's just, where do I want to end up? And what steps do I have to start taking to end up in that direction?
Well, in the digital marketing, did you... Go ahead, sorry.
I was just saying, I don't know if you've seen those graphs of like the line and then, 1% variation. And it keeps just 1%, and eventually it just is in a completely different area. But that's what I was going for. It wasn't just like, I'm going to make this overnight success and be here. It's just, I'm going to start working at this, and eventually I'm going to be able to branch away and make this work.
Hmm. And what drove you, that sort of end vision, or were you enjoying it also? You said you had an affinity for marketing. How did that play in the decision? Did you enjoy the work as it was going on, even if you weren't sure it was going to materialize into something?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I enjoy is helping people, right? Like that's why I went into firefighting. And within marketing, I mean, again, I've done a lot of different things. I'm a pretty firm believer that you could teach a chimpanzee to pull coffee at Starbucks, right? I've worked a Starbucks job, and I'm pretty sure it could be replaced by a zoo monkey. But as far as really helping people in their lives and their business, like marketing makes a substantial change in lives. Right? If you can help a business who's struggling with marketing, like you're saving their families, divorce and kids and providing for families. And it is this holistic thing. And yeah, it's not, fixing a diabetic and picking someone up and doing CPR. It's a different type of life impact, but helping a business succeed and thrive impacts people's lives and is very helpful in a different way. And so that's where I wanted to go, is something that is beneficial to others. I grew up a military brat, and my dad's like, you want to go to, you want to join the Air Force? And I was like, nah. He's like, why not? That helps people. I was like, yeah, but I don't want to have to like shoot someone. Like, I'm a big fan of the do no harm type of thing. And I want to be in control of what I do. And so marketing is a very easy way to accommodate my values and vision with what I want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we've been teasing it for a few minutes about getting deeper in the decision making. Why don't you just go right into it and say, how does your decision making methods or the way you think about it help with your business, help your clients? What does that look like? Because to me, marketing is a path where, out of all the different business disciplines, I feel like making a firm decision is always more ambiguous with marketing because there's so many factors in play. So I'd love to just hear your whole take on all the things I mentioned.
I mean, digital marketing is like the nebulous black hole of business jargon, right? Like there's a million different ways that you can go about it. And what I do is very specific, but within that, I'm not going to try to pimp my product. We're here to talk about business theology, if you will, and decision making. But I decide things and make decisions very differently than the average human, in that I use these skills from firefighting. And so we use what's called recognition prime decision making, which is essentially you see a problem or something that needs to happen. And instead of, weighing, here's option A and going through it, and option B and going through it, and option C, we start kind of how I'd mentioned, like the end, right? Like, what do I want? I want to have kids and grandkids. And so I say, if I see this pattern and I take these actions, will I get the desired result to get there? Yes or no? And if it's yes, then I'll start with that. Or if it's a yes, but, then I'll start with it with a modification and see if that works. And if that simulation that I'll run through in my head works, then we go through it. And if it doesn't, then I'll kick it out and I'll see, other factors or anything. And it doesn't mean that I can't revisit that strategy, but the strategy comes very quickly in recognizing what it is, right? So in a not hypothetical term, when we were on the case of a house fire, right? We see fire coming out of the window. We don't go, there's a fire there. I wonder if we should pull a hose or if we should call, we have systems in place that we see a problem. We have steps that we take to meet the outcome. And if we think that that'll work, that's what we go for, right? There's no decision-making hemming and hawing of A versus B versus C, right? And so it's the same thing with how I make choices, is that we take pattern recognition with the outcome and we apply it. And if it works, it's 99% that it usually does. And if it doesn't, then we switch it up as we go. But
how do you handle a situation where you haven't solved the problem before? So like with fire, there's been many times you've applied a solution to it. So, you have it broken down. What do you do if it's a new issue?
Yeah. So again, you rely back on experience, right? Like very few things are brand new, like never have been seen before, right? Like ChatGPT is different. It's a brand new technology, right? You're like, oh, I need to change and experience this and actually get into this. But I'd say like most business decisions that you come across isn't like this brand new thing that you don't have any experience or any life experience or anything at all that you can relate to. And so when you come across something that's brand new, you have to reassess it and adjust. And again, run that mental simulation. Does this fix the problem? Yes or no? Right? And usually 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to have a solution that fixes your problem. And if it doesn't, then you need to get creative with it. There's nothing wrong with being creative, But as far as speed and efficiency, recognizing the problem and applying the pattern to it will fix it.
So if I'm hearing that right, the real heart of that method is there could be a million options to solve something. But if you're cycling quickly and you recognize either from historic precedents or just from knowledge that you have on hand that one thing hits a fit for the outcome you want, you don't overthink it. You just apply. Is that more or less correct?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And for
analysis paralysis is when you have a bunch of options, right? Like, hey, I want to go read a book. And you go to your group and like, hey, what's a good book to read on marketing or, life or whatever it is? And people will be like, oh, here's 50,000 books that you should read. And all these ones are really good. And you go, oh God, I don't know which one. Right. Like, and you start like reading the dust jackets of all of them and the back covers and going to Google and doing like, that's analysis paralysis. I'm just going to like dig into the information instead of actually just picking up a book and reading. Now, you could probably read 3 of the books by the time you're done doing your research on all of them. And so just being like, hey, you ask your questions, what's a good book? All of them are going to be good recommendations for the most part. And you can look at the title and be like, how to, win friends and influence people. That sounds like what I'm looking for. And you grab it and you read it. And like, you don't have to go in this whole in-depth A versus B versus C. And I know that's a very benign choice, right? Like reading a book versus making a business decision, but it's the exact same principle. Right? And so real life example for you, I had a guy that I was talking with, we're at a convention thing, and he's like, hey, he bought this e-com brand that's for marketing these watches. It's like, I'm having this hard time getting, these clients for here, like this type of stuff. And I was like, well, links to your website. So he pulls it up and I go, okay. I was like, who's your competition? He's like, well, kind of on par with like Citizen and these people. I go, okay. I was like, well, what's your marketing thing? And so within about 5 minutes, I was able to break down an exact marketing strategy for him that doesn't do what I do, right? None of my services were for him. But I was like, this is exactly what you should do. I was like, and this will crush what these guys do in these 4 areas. Because I'm not weighing like, oh, well, if you do this versus this, it's just like, I can see his pattern. I see what his problem is. I know who his clients are. And I know that this action will get him to his desired result. And that's exactly how we approach it, is you have to start with that end in mind and recognizing the pattern of how to get there. And if you understand the steps, if you understand the results that come from your actions, you don't need to go from, waffling between 70 different 1,000 things that you can do.
Right. And generally this really speaks to me. So in my experience, a lot of this is staying present with decisions that are in front of you. And like you said,
for sure,
there's a time that's spent weighing options. So that paralysis piece, if you're going to spend the time out of 3 options, weighing them for hours and hours, you could have just walked through all 3 options and failed at 2 of them and found the right solution in a way. But the way that I'm listening to you and I'm struggling a little bit is the time nature of it, because I think especially with a fire, if we start there, which is the fire's in front of you, it needs to be acted on right now. But when you start talking about, okay, let's apply this type of decision-making framework for future outcomes that I'm forecasting for months in the future, that's where I'm feeling, does this way lend itself more to making decisions in quick succession and trying to keep people focused on the present? Or do you think that it is effective if you're forecasting, let's say, being a grandparent? Because that's 50 years in the future or whatever it is. And to me, that seems like it would be tougher to go that long in time.
Yes and no, right? It definitely, recognition prime decision making definitely lends to making good decisions quickly and effectively, right? You have an immediate problem, let's get this solved, let's move on to the next one. But it also helps with that pattern recognition of long-term problems and solutions. Like I forecasted, hey, I can either stay in this toxic job or I can work my way out of it. What do I need to do? Right? Like I was able to immediately see the results and weigh the things that I needed to do to work my way out of it. And yes, that's 30 years down the line, but it still gave me the rough framework that I needed to take the initial steps. Now, just because I start those initial steps doesn't mean that I never come back to it, or I never revisit it, or I never tweak it or make adjustments, but it gets me going instead of stopping and waffling and trying to figure out, oh God, what are my skill sets? What are, who do I know? What is my network? But it got me being like, hey, I have skills. I can work on this right now. I can start leveraging these 5 different things that are in my, repertoire. So yes, it is a long-term outcome for that, but it gave me initial actions.
Well, this is where I think you mentioned it earlier, and maybe it's clicking in now. You can set a long-term goal, but the question you're asking yourself is, in this present moment, is what I'm doing in a pattern that would lend to that goal? And if the answer is no, then you have to remove yourself from it. That's what you're articulating, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of times too, we have people that essentially spin the wheels in their business, right? And it's when they're, especially when they're starting out, they're like, oh, I need to get my logo. I need to get the color scheme right for my website. I need to get this and that. And it's like, does that move the needle in your business? Right? Is someone not going to do business with you because your logo isn't optimized, or, you know, your website isn't fully, like, that doesn't do anything for you. And while you feel, but it's like mental masturbation, right? Like, it feels great in the moment, but really nothing comes out of it. It's just the recognition prime decision making gets you past that hurdle.
But I think that's the highlight for me, is the problem solution connection, because blind action or just taking a lot of action doesn't to me equate to getting things done. Whereas if you prioritize the solutions or the problems that you need to solve, that, you know, and then you're putting most of your energy into the priority problems, that seems to me to be the most crucial component of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Generally, as humans, we come to problems and we approach them from the solution point of view, or not the solution point of view, but the option point of view, I should say. Right? Like, ooh, dinner time. Ooh, I could do this, or I could do this, or maybe will kids eat that? I'm not really sure. Like, maybe I should go out. How am I gonna? But really, it's like, if I approach dinner from the solution of, I need to make dinner. What's in my fridge? Okay, I've got, you know,
or even
pasta.
People need to eat. But the problem is really people need to eat. You know, so like, how solves that?
Right, you switch it, right? Instead of being like, I've got 50,000 things. How should I make dinner? It's, I go to my pantry and say, these are 5 things I can make out of what I have. Does pasta serve my needs tonight? Yeah, cool. I'm making pasta. I don't have to waffle and, you know, spend 30 minutes deciding what I'm having for dinner. Am I going out? Because I approach it not from the options, but the solution. And in business, it's the same way. It's, I need more clients, right? How am I going to get more clients? Well, it's either, am I spending time in marketing, sales, you know, kind of outreach am I doing? Which one's going to get me where I need to go? Or I have an HR problem, right? Is it a person problem? Is it a solutions problem? Is it a systems problem? Where do I need to actually focus? And then how do I take those steps? It makes it much more simple. Instead of saying, ooh, I have this nebulous bad thing. Maybe I should find out, you know, the best way out of 20 ways to fix this problem, instead of just taking action and getting it.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, I was going to say, and to slip it in here, because I think a lot of it hovers around, a lot of people in my experience get paralyzed because they've got a problem. They feel like what they're doing now, like the firefighting, for instance, could be meeting it okay. And they're afraid to move because they're not as confident in something better. So I guess the situation that I'm outlining is the one where a lot of people, they're just, like you said, they're afraid, but it's not because they necessarily think they have a problem that isn't being met. It's just that they're unhappy and that they don't know what else is out there. So like, they don't even know their options. So they just sit there and they do nothing. And I see that kind of malaise or that sort of paralysis a lot too. Do you see that as a little bit differently?
It's absolutely different, right? Because within this decision-making that I've, you know, talked about, it's very much, I have something that I need to change immediately, or I want to change, or I am working towards. Whereas a fear of the unknown is definitely more of a mindset problem, right? Of going back to that safety net of, I'm not putting in 100% effort because I know that I don't have to. Right? Yeah, I'm dissatisfied or I'm happy, but I'm afraid of what success might mean. I'm afraid of what failure will mean. Or I'm afraid of my family judging me. And if I don't take action, I'm not going to be judged because it's the status quo. And so moving past that is definitely a different problem to have, right? And I think it's tough. And there's not a good way to be like, hey, you know, you've got this. And to help people ease their mind into entrepreneurship. Like, entrepreneurship is hard. I'll be the first one to admit it. And it's tough and it can be lonely. And your family's not going to get it because there have always been W-2 earners, and having the first entrepreneur in the family, they're not going to understand why you would walk away from security, right? And it is difficult. But just because it's hard and difficult doesn't mean that you have to be alone or that you are alone, right? There are always groups, and, you know, myself included, that we are rooting for you. right? You want to take that step in entrepreneurship. Like, we love you and we care about you. We want you to succeed. And even though you don't know me and I don't know you, and you will probably never meet, right? Even if you hook me up on LinkedIn or send me a message, like, you are starting out, I am in your corner. And there are groups and communities across the globe that will help you and give you free advice and try to celebrate you and help you with those first steps. So if you're afraid and then you're in that spot of fear, there's the people that don't support you, but that doesn't mean that you're not supported, that people don't care. You just don't know that we're out here.
Yeah.
Just going back to the decision making, just where does analysis fit in though? So like clearly we know what analysis paralysis is, that's bad. But let's say even using a fire, and it just came back to me that I was looking for a fire extinguisher not long ago, and then I thought that was pretty simple: fire extinguisher, fire, and then it's like depends on the kind of fire. Some fires you don't want to put this on because it makes it worse, and some fires, like even something like fire that seems so simple to me was more complicated than I thought. Whereas if I just go out and get water, like that may or may not be the right solution. So how do you relate the analysis to the steps you're taking?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the analysis comes into pattern recognition, right? Like you have a pot of oil on the stove that caught on fire. You have a pretty good idea of what to do or what not to do. But if you don't somehow know what to do, right, and you're like, I'm going to throw water on this, and you throw it on there and it blasts out at you, there's that, oh God moment. And then you have to take 2 seconds, 3 seconds, look at the fire and be like, that didn't work, right? And then you need to come up with a new solution. Okay, so I put wet stuff on the hot stuff and that didn't work. What else does fire need? It needs air. Okay, let's cover this up, right? Let's go to step 2. You have to go into analysis when things don't work out for you, or when you
try something quickly and then analyze based on the interaction that you've had with whatever the problem is.
Even though you didn't know it, you analyzed it and said, I need to put water on this, right? Your basic experience. This will go out? Yeah, it's going to go out. So you threw water on the fire. You didn't have the outcome you expected, which happens, right? And when that happens, then you go back to it and you say, okay, water doesn't solve my problem. What will? And it's the same way in business and marketing. You're like, hey, I went hard into social media and I got a bunch of tire kickers. Okay, I need to reassess my issue that I'm dealing with here, right? Maybe Facebook is not where my clients are living. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of looky-loos and, curious Karens, but that's not who my market is. Let's reassess this.
So prioritize the micro of the cycle of seeing a problem, analyzing, solving, and do that very fast and iteratively, rather than breaking it up into analysis, figuring out a solution, and then a problem, writ large. Just do it in micro cycles.
Right, exactly, right? So you have that fire on the stove, and you say, okay, I could put water on this, and you think, like, I could cover it. Maybe I should take it outside and throw it in the snow, or maybe, and by the time I get done with my 10 different options, it's burning the kitchen down. Right. Or I can go up and I can throw some water on it. And when it doesn't work, I go, gah! And I grab the lid and I go to the next one. Right. And I just go from one to one. And so that's the difference.
Yeah. Well, it's just acting. I mean, and this is my interpretation. You gotta, and I'm in total agreement. You just gotta keep your life will go better for you if you're acting as much as you can. Like thinking less and doing more. And I think this also goes back to tying together some of the other questions we had a few minutes ago about the biggest thing is people, when do you act? And you should always try to err on the side of acting as much as you can. But I think also to get yourself over that inertia, I would recommend people train themselves like you're talking about, which is micro action should be your default, right? Which is even if you're not sure if you have a problem or not, act on it and see what happens versus just sit there and try to rationalize why you're okay where you're at. I think that's a big part of that paralysis piece we talked about in the alternate form.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have ever taken online courses from, all the various gurus and people who are out there teaching stuff. I've taken a ton of them. When I was going to learn marketing, I was like, I need to learn everything I can from anyone. And so I bought a ton of courses and all the different things. But the common thread that I saw from people who had success are the ones who take action. Right. And when I did fix and flip real estate and I was going to investor meetings and stuff, I was like, man, this guy to my right is dumb as rocks, but he kept getting like 2 or 3 houses a month. How is he getting this? And the difference between him and me is that he was taking action. Right? It doesn't matter that I knew I was smarter because, oh God, it just grated on me when I'd hear him talk and be like, oh, I can answer all your questions. But it's just like, what is the difference? And it came down to action. And like taking action trumps inaction every day. And nature, and I love what you were just saying, but nature abhors a vacuum. And not taking action leaves a vacuum in authority in your life. What I mean is that you end up at the mercy of the circumstances that you're put in and not taking control the other way around. So a real life example, right, to tie this into how that looks in life is that we were on a call, right, emergency medical call at a bar. And we got there, a lady got punched in the head or something like that. And I was with one of the volunteers and I was letting them do a thing. It was a teaching moment. I was like, hey, do your assessment. And so they're on the range, she's doing her thing. I was like, hey, let's move from inside the rig, right? Let's get out of the rig. And so we get in the rig, she finishes it up and gets out, and it's done. At the end of it, I said, hey, you did a good job, right? You checked all the boxes, but you had a lot of difficulty because you didn't take control of the situation. And what that means is that, yeah, right, we got there, we controlled the scene, but she started doing everything outside. And I was like, get her into an enclosed environment where you're in control, right? Let's put her in the rig right away. You can check her all around really quick, head to toe on the back, the parts that you won't be able to see easily when you're sitting inside. Do that quick, get her inside. Got her inside, but she didn't say where to have him sit. So the lady took the captain's seat. That made it hard to access her. Right? So then my partner's like stepping over the gurney back and forth, trying to work around this person instead of putting her where she should have put her, which would have made it easier to work around and just get it done. And so since she didn't take control of the situation, she let the patient take control. And that just made, her work increase by about 75%. She had to put 75% more effort into doing the exact same thing that she would have had to do. And so in our lives, when we don't take control and we let our circumstances dictate, we become much more reactive. And when you take micro actions, you take control and authority of your situation, just like that fire in the kitchen, right? The fire in the kitchen is going to do whatever it's going to do, and will keep doing it until you decide to put it out. And when you take micro actions to put that fire out, you take control of the situation and you change that narrative.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely well said. And if you don't act, like your comment about a vacuum, I think is very evocative. Somebody will, or something will act. The longer you sit there and you don't put an action out there. And the people who are taking the lead and, as you mentioned, taking control of themselves or their lives or the situation, a lot of times they're the first to act. And I think all of us would benefit from a little more of what you're talking about, which is realizing that there's only a state of being in action or being in decision. And if you live your life more in the action state, you're going to get more done, even if some of those paths are just learning that there's not the right path. So you can bend back the other way.
Even if you make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Like taking those actions and learning that will give you the know-how to make better decisions in the future when you come across those same things.
Right. Every action you take, you're going to learn from it, whether it was the right or wrong action. And like you mentioned very eloquently earlier, for anyone out there who's listening, who's afraid, feel like you're identifying a fear to act, as long as you're acting, there are people there to support you. Steven's saying he's there to support you, whether you're being an entrepreneur or you're just switching jobs or you're worried about whatever it is. It's the putting yourself out there and connecting with other people, especially in this day and age. There's so much support. So there's no reason to fear moving past your fear and doing something. And I'll throw in my 2 cents on this, which is we talked about earlier. Well, how do you know when you have a problem to act on? Because you talked a lot about, okay, here's a problem here. If you're unhappy at all, it's a problem in my book. And I think this is part of what I would espouse as being more conscious, which is we as humans don't have to accept a state of slight unhappiness for our entire life. If you're feeling unhappy to any degree that you identified it, you have the right to act on it. You don't have to justify why you're unhappy. If you feel you're unhappy at all to any percentage, then make a change. At least that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. And going into that change, right? And there's a lot of people who don't know. I'm unhappy, but I don't know what's out there. Right. And it just goes into kind of that analysis stage that Jonathan was talking about of, maybe you get Strength Finders 2.0 and you start doing a little research on yourself. What are you good at? What do you care about? What's important to you? Right? Give yourself some direction because you can take action. Right? I'm unhappy in my engineering job. I guess I'll go apply to Starbucks. Right? There's a huge disconnect there. But if you assess yourself, you're like, well, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What do I want my life to look like? And you take a little bit of time to start making a pathway for yourself. You'll find, you'll narrow your solutions down from 50 million to, maybe 2 dozen. You say, I'd be happy maybe with, any of these 24 choices here. Like, why don't we try this one? Or why don't we explore what this looks like more in depth? And actually start taking, again, micro actions towards a goal of making yourself happier.
For sure. Well, Steven, as we're closing up time, I know you didn't get a chance to overtly talk about your company, but do you have any closing thoughts about what you could do if anyone wants to work with a marketing person who's predisposed to action? Because I think you've made that very clear. So what would you say if anyone wants to connect with you or work with that kind of marketing professional?
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, we help our clients get on the front page of Google. So if you are tired of being like, man, I'm always chasing clients and I want them to actually start chasing me, I'm a good spot to go and check out. Right? I'd love to help you on your journey to be a self-sustaining business that is known for what you do, because I think that's important. So front page of Google is very small, and I think you deserve to be on it.
Absolutely. Well, that's as interesting a hook as any. Well, what I'll say is, if you want to reach out to Steven, some of his information will be on the podcast. And other than that, thank you so much, Steven, for coming on the show, sharing your thoughts about decision-making and your background and what you do. We really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate just the opportunity to be here and speak to your audience. And I hope that they got something out of it. And lastly, just again, I want to say, you might be struggling with entrepreneurship. You might be unhappy, but we care about you. Even if we don't know you, right? Like, it's hard and it's difficult and it can be lonely, and it doesn't have to be. There's lots of communities out there that are willing to support you and happy to support you and will celebrate you. So if you're feeling that way, please come find us, because we're out there and we care.
We might use that for the end of our podcast going forward. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And for those of you listening, thanks for tuning in to episode 69. We will see you next week.